Okay, it is 7 o'clock. Let's go ahead and call to order the September 3rd meeting of the Tonganoxie City Council. Would you go ahead and take roll, please, Lindsay?
Yes. Mr. Partridge?
Here.
Miss McCutcheon?
Here.
Miss Stevens?
Here.
Mr. Donnelly?
Here.
Mr. Dale?
Here.
And our mayor is absent, so as Mayor Pro Tem, I'll go ahead and lead this fine meeting. Let's go ahead and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, first on the agenda is next on the agenda is to approve the minutes from our previous meeting on August 19th.
I would make a motion that we approve the minutes as presented.
All right, there's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes. Also, to move forward along the business of the city, there's a consent agenda in which we review the bill payments. Is there any discussion or a motion on that matter?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
All right, thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you. All of those in favor?
Aye.
All right. That passes. Oh, Jenny, if you could squeak out just a little bit more. No, I'm just teasing. I can tell you're very sick, poor thing. Before we get to old business, Dan, did anybody sign up for the regular open agenda to speak at this time? Or folks here probably for the public hearing?
We had no signups for the regular meeting, but we do have one person signed up for the public hearing.
Okay, sounds good. All right, we're going to move on to new business. So at this time, we're going to have a public hearing, and we can have these together because I sense that these topics are probably pretty aligned. A public hearing for the 2025 budget revenue neutral rate and a public hearing considering the proposed 2025 budget as published. And if everyone's all right with that, we can open the public hearing for both of those at this time.
Sure. Mayor Pro Tem, if you wouldn't mind, and maybe it might be beneficial to folks here or folks that are watching or will watch it later, if staff kind of goes through the budget presentation, that way maybe we'll answer some questions or create some new questions. I think it'll be transparent to say, well, this is what the city has decided to prioritize and how it would be funded.
Yes. One of the things I'm really proud of in terms of how we work on the budget here is that it's a lengthy process, and our city staff is very detail oriented. And we do have a lot of information on our website from previous meetings, but I know that Mr. Porter has put together a presentation that will be a good review for everybody here, just about the exciting things that are happening in terms of our future and the way that we've been managing the budget here in Tonganoxie. Go ahead, Mr. Porter, and share what you have for us.
I might just do a quick introduction. So we do have a brief presentation, but there's just a couple of things I wanted to mention. And, you know, one of the things, and I know you've heard me say this since I've been the city manager here, one of the best assets, if not the best asset we have at the city are the employees. We have a very small group of total full-time employees, and we ask a lot of them, and in return, we have a great professional staff. We've appreciated the attention over the years to doing things like pay studies, see what other communities are paying, just to make sure that we're appropriately compensating staff and that we're being competitive in the marketplace. And so we want to thank you for those ongoing commitments. A couple of things I'd also like to bring to your attention are, as we've gone through the budget process, we've heard from community groups. And I think one thing that Tonganoxie does well as a community is, I think individually, not everyone has a ton of money to go throw at projects or ideas or things that get done. But what we've been successful at is partnering with other community groups and combining funding efforts to go get things done. And I think that's where you see a lot of activity in the community. Secondarily, I think it's important to remind folks that we're building off last year's budget where the city cut 4 mills, the school district cut some, the rec commission cut a little or stayed about the same, and then the county did a very minute reduction. And of course, the state just stays the same. And so, the city took a pretty big hit last year in terms of revenue. What's changed is as we've, explored opportunities to partner. For example, we'll talk about one project later tonight that we were looking at maybe sharing some costs with the school district on a project that both the city and the school district could benefit from. I think conversely from that has been multiple conflict points with the county. So we know the county's already increased their mill levy by 1.8 mills, but this year we've been saddled with the county just terminating an ongoing commitment to shared road maintenance for those roads that are on the edge of the city and the county limits. And so the county really apparently had no plan. So all summer we've been fielding calls from city residents that live in those areas. And so we've had to expend funds and kind of go try to do things to help folks feel better about what it looks like in the community. But we're doing that with equipment that we don't currently have. And so that's important to remember. We've also tried to grow the community in certain areas, and I won't make too much comment of that other than we're in district court with our own county because we feel like they didn't follow the letter of the law when it came to annexation. So there's those ongoing issues that we'll also have to account for, and I think you'll see that. The other thing is working with the departments, and I'm glad to see we have a couple of department heads here. Pretty minimal request year over year from the departments in terms of equipment. You'll see some vehicles this year, but that's because we're replacing vehicles that are in that 10-plus year mode, and we're kind of at that tipping point of maintenance costs, which we track, versus what we can still get for those vehicles if we dispose of them on a service like Purple Wave that helps offset some of those initial new costs. And then finally, probably as a reminder to everybody, those big capital and maintenance improvement projects that we spend a lot of time on. Tonganoxie's coming out of a period of, our predecessors did the best they could 20 plus years ago. But there was a lot of debt issued at that time because the city wasn't in a very strong financial position. So Mr. Porter will share a slide later that shows some of our debt service schedule coming off. And then we'll talk about some of the big projects we have that we're looking at, like expanding the wastewater treatment plant, the 14th Street project that KDOT's wanted us to go tackle. And those are big ticket items. But then we'll also touch on all the projects that we've paid for, including a bridge project that's underway, a water tower that a federal grant paid half of. And so those are all things we're proud of. But I guess at the end of the day, and before I turn it over to Mr. Porter, we've built this budget on ongoing conversations, multiple hearings, inviting the public to make requests for budget initiatives. And I strongly feel that what Dan's going to go through tonight is reflective of that joint effort by all those parties. And so with that, Mr. Porter, hop in.
Thank you, George. So the first slide or second slide shows a quick summary of what we're going to cover tonight. I won't belabor it because, like I said, we'll cover it in the forthcoming slides. Talking about a little more in detail the calendar and where we've been. This is the culmination of really what's a 6 or 7 month process, starting back in March with the spring retreat, where the city council sat down and at a high level discussed the concerns of the community, the opportunities of the community, how things were going, what things we want to look at and target in the future. And building off of that, we worked through CMIP work sessions, especially in the month of May. In June, we dove in a little more into the general fund budget and other funds financed with tax levies, such as property tax and other funding sources. We met with each of the departments, had a department director opportunity to address the council, speak in person about their requests for changes or enhancements to their budget, equipment purchases, and the like. And we covered all of that in great detail in those meetings. In the month of July, we really focused back on what the property tax rate maximum limit was going to be. And as required by state law, we notified the county clerk of that item published notice of public hearings, both for the revenue neutral rate and the budget public hearing, which will open after this presentation tonight. Talking about where we'll go from here, we'll cover that again at the end of the presentation, but in a nutshell, we do have until the end of this month, the month of September, to file our certified budget with the county clerk, to be then filed with the state. So you can see on this slide, we're at the very end of this process in the box highlighted in purple, and excited to move forward and bring all this work towards the conclusion. Talking at a very high level about what's included in the budget and what it accomplishes. This slide, I think, illustrates in a fairly good way connections to several critical success factors that are included. These aren't all the critical success factors in the strategic plan, but these are 4. And those are investing in well-planned and maintained infrastructure, which you'll hear a lot more about in the project list tonight. Enhancing local amenities and services, and as George mentioned, we're working hard to partner and support other community groups and organizations to help them provide community building activities, services, programs, and a wide variety of people of all ages and different circumstances. We're also looking to support outstanding city services, and like George mentioned, and I'd echo, our people are our biggest resource in the city organization. They make a lot of things happen, fix a lot of issues, and do a very good job performing those services. And so we need to be able to compensate them and look to them for suggested improvements to service, as well as the community and you as the policymakers on the city council. We're also looking at financial stability, and that's something that isn't limited to our budget process. That's something that we talk about when we talk about topics like fund balance goals, when we talk about bond ratings preparations, when we talk about strategizing ways to minimize debt load and debt obligations, but also take it out when it is, in fact, beneficial and a good strategic move. And we'll talk a lot more about that kind of in an overall sense through the discussion tonight. Property tax is the subject, really the focal point of these 2 public hearings tonight, but the budget expenditure limit authority is what the council will approve when you approve the adopted budget. So when we talk about key things to focus in on, I would definitely point towards the property tax rate, or our mill levy expected amount, and that expected expenditures by fund. That's our focal point of the discussion this evening. So kicking things off at sort of the highest level across all budgeted funds, which is actually 16 different funds. So it runs the gamut from the general fund to utility funds to capital improvement funds, specific restricted capital funds for fire and police activities, everything of that nature. This is a breakdown in the pie chart showing the types of revenue from largest to smallest. So charges for service, which includes utility charges as the primary, and also charges for admission to the water park. Those are the 2 largest sources. Those reflect about 29% of all city revenue, so just under 30%. Property taxes make up a little less than a quarter, 24% of all city revenue. 19% of city revenues are sales tax across all funds. That includes our general fund sales tax, our infrastructure sales tax, special sales tax in the city, and the city's share of the overall countywide sales tax. Looking then at the smaller categories, you run through court fines, transfers intra-fund between different funds where that's allowed, franchise fees, grants, and other miscellaneous revenues. A couple highlights I wanted to point out. The general fund, our primary general government services fund, is $4.501 million in 2025 in total revenues. We'll talk about that in a little more detail in a later slide. The utility funds collectively, and that's water, sewer, sanitation, and stormwater, those are also in order of magnitude in that listing, make up a little less than $3.8 million in revenue in 2025. Our library operations and benefits tax levy that we collect and then remit to the library is a little over $625,000. Our capital projects and road improvement funds have a higher than usual budget, and we'll talk about why that is in future slides, but that's at $3.165 million in 2025. And a couple of large capital projects make up the majority of that. Finally, our miscellaneous equipment and debt service funds as a whole total a little more than 1.15 million. So those are sort of orders of scale without going into every single fund and having 50 slides to kind of share some highlights about that. Our revenue across the board for all of our budgeted funds is just under 13 million at $12.906 million. And that isn't reflected really clearly in a summarized fashion in the state budget form, so that's one reason we share it in this forum and fashion, so you have that information and can kind of recall that number. So moving to expenditures, this is a similar breakout by category with highlights, and this again is all funds. Personal services, so paying salaries and benefits for employees to do services for the city, make up about 31% of all expenses. Contractual services, buying something, buying a service, buying contracted assistance of any kind, are about 32%, so a slightly larger amount overall across the budget respective to personal services. Commodities are a small component of our overall spending at only 4%. Capital outlay is a little larger than usual this year at 16%. And grants and other programs are a little less than 1%. And debt service makes up 12%. And we'll talk a lot more about that on some upcoming slides as well. Interfund transfers are also about 5%. So the same highlights in this similar fashion are shown on this slide, breaking out by the general fund, the combined utility funds, library tax pass-through, library benefits pass-through, capital projects and roads, and debt service obligations. And overall expenditures anticipated for all budgeted funds is just under $15.7 million. So you can notice at a high level, all budgeted funds, that's a $2.761 million drawdown in fund balance if you just do the math on the last two slides. About 1.8 million of that is the city's share of the Temp Notes 2023A repayment for our water tower project at the business park. So that's a large amount of that. It's about 65% of that drawdown in fund balance. Other funds that have slight drawdowns in balance, structural change between revenue and expense in the given year. The general fund has about 0.25 million in drawdown. The utility funds collectively have about 0.5 million. Capital projects are about 0.37 million, and those three total about 1.14 million. So that makes up close to the other 35% in strategic drawdown of funds available when you compare revenues and expenses for 2025. Any questions about those high-level numbers? Okay. So diving in a little more on the general fund, again, our most critical fund and our largest expenditure fund across the city. What's shown on this slide, and I apologize for the small font on the screens, hopefully it's a little easier to see on a handout. What that shows is breaking out revenue sources by subcategory in the general fund. So property taxes, which are about 2.3 million, sales taxes, which are just over $1 million, franchise fees, which are just under $500,000, and then all of the revenues combined between licenses, grants, transfers, and interest earnings total about $680,000. So the percentage breakouts are shown in the pie chart. Again, just to highlight, property tax is more than 50% of the overall funding of the general fund. Sales tax is the next highest at 23%. We did see some growth in our projections for franchise fees this year. Some of that is reflected in utility rate changes by those providers. So as they raise their rates as allowed by the Kansas Corporation Commission decisions for things like electric and gas, natural gas, we do collect a share of fees collected for those services. So our corresponding revenue has seen an increase that hasn't been the case in many other years when those rates were held relatively flat by those utilities. Our next slide shows a somewhat similar breakout for the general fund expenses. And one thing to highlight, as you recall, back in an earlier slide, general fund personal services costs are shown here as 70%. City as a whole, overall budget it's down closer to 30%. So the general fund really does support, in a large sense, the majority of the work that our employees are compensated to do. When you look at the breakout shown by department or service, you can see broken out in the right side of the screen: administration or general department, municipal court, animal services, codes, planning and zoning, council and community funding support, which comes from the general fund, police department, public works, fire, and then the water park. That's sort of a good way to break out and kind of give to someone the context of what services or what provision of staff to support services does the general fund provide and does the city budget produce. So the largest percentage, as you see, is the police department. That budget's about $1.73 million. The fire department's the next largest at $1.233 million in 2025. Admin and public works are at $709,000 and $493,000, although a share of those costs is shared with the utility funds, which those employees directly support. And finally, the water park is $198,000. When you talk about the two public safety departments that are the largest, they make up about 72% of our general fund budget. That's about $2.964 million. That's about 39 mills in the current valuation, and the general fund only has a little more than 27 mills. So more than the amount of property tax we collect is required every year just to fund our two largest departments, the police department and the fire department, and those services. It's also a little less than 3 times the amount of sales tax we collect in a year. So those are kind of contextual numbers to share, to kind of emphasize the variety of services and then the scale of the resources needed to support those services from the general fund. Any questions on that slide? Okay. Our enterprise funds are shown on the next slide, which I should advance to. One thing that was discussed in our budget process and has been an ongoing discussion point, our last rate study was completed for utility rates in 2019 and enacted in 2020 with changes. Since then, the city has held the line on our utility rates, and the graph at the top right-hand part of this page really emphasizes why we've been able to do that. You can see from 2018 to 2020 a very slight decrease in the average monthly water consumption across the whole city. That's not abnormal looking back longer term in the city's history, except for periods of great growth. As people came to the community and added houses, added businesses, they add demand, but at the same time, your devices and appliances get more efficient over time. So a lot of other utilities show, even in periods of moderate growth in population or residences or businesses, very slight declines or flat revenues or water consumption numbers. And we're not alone in that regard. Starting in 2022, though, we did see some pretty significant increases. So in 2022 is about a 1% jump from the prior year in total water demand. 2023, it went up about 13%. That would have been unprecedented, but in 2024, we're projecting to go up 22%. And so a lot of that is driven by development activity at our Tonganoxie Business Park and large industrial users. Those just are on a scale that is different than a normal residence or commercial business that doesn't have a water-intensive process. So as the utility has grown since 2020 in particular, growth in demand and thus payment for those consumptions in water and in corresponding sewer has been able to allow the city to keep rates flat through that time. Had we not had that level of demand growth, some cost increases like our cost of purchasing water from BPU, which has gone up 6% the last 2 years and is going to go up 6% next year in July as part of a scheduled rate increase. That alone would have required us to do a more immediate rate analysis and rate adjustment. But we've been able to factor that, assume that increased costs through increased volume of sales of water is sort of the summary of that. Looking down on the bottom right-hand side, that outlines for the blue, the water fund, the orange, the sewer fund, for the green, the trash or sanitation fund for recycling and solid waste for residential customers, and then in purple, the stormwater fund, expenses by category in 2025's budget. So you can see water and sewer share a burden of personal services costs. Contractual services are dominated by water, and again, that's largely purchases from BPU. Probably next year, we'll tick over 80% of our water being purchased from BPU. In the past, it's usually been 60-40, 70-30, 75-25, but this year we're at about 79%. So that trend continues to shift that direction as we need more water and purchase it accordingly. Any questions on these funds or these information? Okay. The next slide illustrates the city's projected mill levy change. And again, the mill levy we estimate at this time, but it isn't finalized till our valuation for the tax district is finalized by the county in October. You can see shown on this slide a detailed view of the highlighted on both the left and right-hand side of the table, the mill levy for the library operational fund and the library employee benefits fund. So that fund is a 0.062 net increase across those two. That's a little over $4,700 equivalent in revenue, higher than the prior year, or flat mill levy, revenue associated with a flat mill levy from the prior year. The library came in July and talked to the city council about their rationale for this request. Our only limitation on the mill levy is 5.95 mils is the cap of the operational fund, and as you can see, they're well below that value after some slight decreases in prior years when they were closer to that level. This is actually also just a very slight net decrease if you compare last year's decrease to this year's increase for those two funds. So it is very minuscule, but it is not an exactly flat mill levy or tax rate for these two services. Any questions on this slide? Okay. So the next slide illustrates our friendly dollar bills slide, which shows for the average or any taxpayer in the city of Tonganoxie, what services are you funding with every dollar of property tax you're assigned and that you pay. What's shown in more detail on the bottom is the breakout by taxing jurisdiction with detailed numbers. But in a high level, the top dollar bill chart shows the school district's the largest taxing district at 41 cents of every dollar. The county's at 26 cents. The city general fund and debt service fund are 24 cents. The library collected through the city is 5 cents. The rec commission's 3, and the state's 1. What's interesting is in the last 2 years, and then again this year, those amounts have changed ever so slightly. So in 2024, the school district was 1 cent higher, the city was the same, and the county was 1 cent lower. In 2023, the school district was again 1 cent higher than this year, and the city was actually larger at 25 cents of every dollar, and the county was down at 24 cents. The reason for that shift, like George mentioned, one thing is that the city has completed a 4 mil reduction in 2024's budget. That was our largest mill levy reduction in recent history, at least, that we're aware of. And the county had a very minuscule reduction. The school had a more substantial reduction. So that's sort of the basis for that shift in the allocation of the property tax dollar for our residents and businesses in Tonganoxie. Looking at the green-headed columns in this table at the bottom, you can see the final approved or projected approved mill levies, which includes the city's 40.757 mills. You can see the county's recently approved as of last week 1.8 mil increase to 37.579, and then the rec commission's approved 4.8 mils. The school district's hearing and decision on budget will be held later this month, so that hasn't been finalized yet. You can see though overall a taxpayer in this district is projected to pay about 1.775 mils more than the rate for this current year, and that's about a 1.2% increase in the tax rate. The next slide shows what that means in dollars and cents. And we used an example of A residential property appraised at $308,000, which is the average in the city of Tonganoxie in the most recent year, with data shared by the county appraiser. We also used, in this example, an average revaluation increase of 2.39%. That was the average across the whole tax district for all value changes of existing property to this year's new appraised value. So that total then goes up to a little more than $315,000 appraised. The taxes you can see shown in the table on the right-hand side, you can see it broken out by jurisdiction, 2024 taxes and then 2025 taxes in this scenario. There's an overall increase of $185 per year, a little less than $15.50 a month, and the city's portion of that increase is about $2.41 more per month. $63 would have been the increase had the value of the house not changed. What's interesting about that with the numbers on the last slide is, for that example, without value going up at all, staying at 308, the county would have collected $64 more, and all the other jurisdictions would have given back $1 between them. So that's sort of the degree of change in the jurisdictions that collect that, if your value doesn't change year over year. Any questions about this slide or this information?
I don't, but Dan, just being conscious of everybody's time
Yes.
who's here to speak, can we skip to the projects that are funded for this next year in the budget?
Sure.
I mean, that's what I think folks are here to, know like what's coming up. Page, I know they start on 17, but I think it looks like you increase the font on page 18.
18 and 19?
Yeah, so it's just easier for folks to read.
Certainly. So the next couple slides, and I'll click through them quickly, budget enhancements for the community and economic development, for the various city departments and services, including some from the general fund and some from utility funds.
And this will be online, folks who are here to speak. I mean, we're not rushing through anything that you can't just, click on our information from tonight and read, but I know, it might be dinner hour at your homes or something like that, and I want to make sure we get to hear what you have to say, that you've come here to say.
And then minor capital projects and equipment, including investment at the water park for needed maintenance activities or replacement of the diving boards. Debt overview, I'll not go into that in great detail other than to share we're currently only at about 25%, or really a little less, 22% of our state assessed debt limit. And that's based on our valuation and the amount of debt that applies to that limit. And so we're well within our margin of ability to issue more debt. Really close to $20 million in additional debt would be accommodated were we to go towards that limit for things like roads, bridges, and other public infrastructure. We also show at the bottom of this slide just a breakout by fund of debt obligations stretching out into 2038. So this slide is sort of an end-all be-all of project planning for the 2025 budget, and I'll show in the next two slides detailed views that enhance the font, but essentially to kind of point out the yellow-headed projects, which I'll talk through in two slides, are pending projects or partially funded projects, and we'll talk about them in more detail. The green funded projects are highlights of the funding sources for 14 projects fully funded using a variety of different funds. So the green funded projects, I won't talk through the funding source of every single one, but those include the project we mentioned earlier for repayment of our temp notes that funded, along with the EDA grant, the water tower construction at the business park, the 4th Street Bridge replacement, which is contract approved, well underway. This is funded in both budgets because some of the expenses will be incurred in 2025. So we need to account for that and be able to make those payments. The wastewater treatment plant expansion engineering is a little under $1 million, and that includes ARPA funds as well as funding from the sewer capital fund. The wastewater treatment plant phase 1, $5 million estimated capital cost, debt service using the SRF funding loan, which we hope to have approved in a month or so, pending KDHE's approval and provision of that document to us, is also included. The sewer main rehab that we've talked about in certain older areas of town that have periodic sewer backups is also a funded project. The water tower repainting, which is a little under $100,000, is also funded for the 2440 highway tower that you often see driving into town. This is the exterior being painted. The police station and fire station capital improvements projects are both funded and previously described in more detail. Water park, like I mentioned, repainting everything underwater and also replacing the diving boards, which are original to 2008 when that facility was installed. Police Tahoe vehicle purchases, 2 Tahoes are included as funded general fund and police capital fund initiative. Use lift equipment that supports community events and miscellaneous work at the water park, at our utility plants, and at other sites in the city. Street lights is also funded. Mobile generator, that purchase was approved actually last meeting with a large lead time, so it's also funded. The Public Works vehicle replacement, after 2 years of no utility truck replacements, this is a provision of 3 purchases of vehicles for the Public Works fleet as those vehicles have aged. Community events, supports, and economic development funds total a little under $55,000 cumulatively, and those are funded in the general fund. And then police, fire, and admin operational budget or commodity budget changes at $32,000 are also shown in there. So that, in a nutshell, is everything that, as the budget is prepared today, encompasses and fully funds those initiatives. The next slide, again, shows those pending projects, and I'll walk through them in a little bit more detail. The 222nd Street project, this is an area of roadway that fronts our business park on the west border and extends down through county property at the moment to the intersection with County Road 1. This project cost is a little over $2.7 million, and as you can see, no funding has been allocated. Pending further discussions and decisions, we expect on matters like annexation and road maintenance on shared roads or county city boundary roads. The top 2 sidewalks projects, so we talked about a list of about 7 different options and narrowed in on one that's just west of the elementary school and middle school campus in an older neighborhood that is missing sidewalks. That's over $500,000, $525,000. We currently have funding included for the design phase, which would allow us to apply for a grant called the cost share grant that may allow us to accommodate that at about 30% of the cost instead of 100%. And so that is funded through the design, but not through full completion, pending that grant decision and other future decisions by the council. 14th Street, this project totals as a whole, if you remember the whole corridor, over $9 million. But the portion that we're talking about, which is realigning East Street with East Street moving south of Washington, and then on the north side, combined with turn lane improvements on both Washington and East Street to benefit the school campus traffic circulation pattern, those 3 project components total $1.775 million. Like we discussed a couple meetings ago with the city council, there were interests from the school district at the time to consider this in their capital planning with unspent capital proceeds that they have available. At this point in time, I might let George kind of highlight at a high level what the current status of that is.
Sure. And thanks to Councilman Dale, he was able to attend a work session with the school board. So it remains something that they would consider a priority. However, when they're balancing in things like rooftops, HVAC units, parking lot improvements, new facilities, other facility upgrades, I think they're going to go through the list of available funds before they ever make it to how high they prioritized this particular project. And so one thing that we've discussed with them is the city could only prioritize it on our end if we had a funding partner from the district. It would make more sense for us to focus on the 14th Street, 2440 corridor just from development potential and properties there. And so there is a spirit of cooperation. I just, it doesn't look like all those stars are gonna align in time to get us moving down the road. There was some discussion of potentially just looking at moving forward with the design end of those costs. But since most of that design would only do the enhancements to make improvements to circulation on their property, I'm not really sure that should be a top priority for the city. And we've gone through a lot of projects, and there's a lot of money on the board. And so I think void of a firm commitment, it needs to move down on our priority list as well. I'd be happy to answer any other questions as we keep moving.
Thanks, George. So the next slide concludes our presentation. There are 2 public hearings which can be held concurrently, but the 2 public hearings are on the topic of the revenue neutral rate as published by the city, and then the published 2025 annual maximum budget expenditures, also published in a combined hearing notice in the newspaper, on the city's website, and with the county, being filed at the county in July. After the public hearing, there are 2 actions required of the city council: approval of a resolution to exceed the revenue neutral rate or take other action, and then that has to be completed by roll call vote. And then secondarily, if prepared, considering adoption of the 2025 budget as presented or with adjustments. And staff are happy to take any questions now or after the public hearing. Thank you for your time and attention and a lengthy presentation.
Thank you, Dan. That was a lot of preparation that you put into there, and it'll be helpful for people to refer back to later. It's a lot of information to, take in, especially if you haven't been working on this for months and months, like the folks present here. All right, if there are no questions for Dan or George at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open both the public hearing for the 2025 budget revenue neutral rate and the public hearing for the consideration of the proposed 2025 budget, which we just learned a little bit more about. And I'm going to open those simultaneously, and then anyone who is here to speak, please come forward. You'll have 3 minutes to address council. All right, if no one is here to address council during the public hearing, I'll go ahead and officially close both the public hearings for the 2025 budget revenue neutral rate, and close the public hearing on the consideration of the proposed 2025 budget as published. The next item is Resolution 092401, a resolution of the City of Tonganoxie, Kansas, to levy a property rate tax, levy a property tax rate exceeding the revenue neutral rate. Have any discussion or motions?
Make a comment if I may.
Of course.
First of all, to the folks who came, thank you for attending. We've had the benefit of 7 months of this and multiple hearings and conversations and seeing it, and I hope you have the opportunity, if you get a chance, to attend the other taxing entities, because it's always a challenge, but nobody showed but you, and we appreciate that very much. It's important.
It is important, and thank you for your time.
So as you can see, one of the concerns that we've had, and I will clearly state that for the last 6 months or maybe even a year, we've really struggled. We are not the largest taxing entity that the citizens or people who live in Tonganoxie have to pay taxes to. Schools, obviously, number 1 by far, but the county now is number 2, taking funds out from my taxes. I'm a taxpayer in Tonganoxie, as everybody else is here. And they're number 2, and they're giving us less services as a citizen of Tonganoxie. And I pay my taxes, and I'm getting less services from the county. And now I'm paying them more than I'm paying the city for the services I use every single day for streets and sewers. And I'm pontificating here on purpose. There has to be an end to that, and we need to have beneficial services, and we need to have a beneficial relationship with the county, and that has really gone south. So if you have any say at the county, we appreciate you speaking up on behalf of Tonganoxie, and because I think our staff, these two gentlemen here, two staff members, do a great job for what we have, and now we're paying for more with less. So I'm done with my pontificating, but I wanted to get that on record that we are getting smaller as a tax-paying entity instead of bigger, or collecting entity. So anyways, that's important.
I appreciate your words very much, Councilman Donnelly. Any other discussion?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better than Mr. Donnelly. I think so much of what is the public kind of perception of property taxes, at least locally, has been driven by appraisals and what's happened on the assessed valuation level at the county over the last couple of years. My hope, and if you look at the data from this year, is that it's some sort of a return to normal. The increases over last year in most people's appraisals are very low. In Tonganoxie, it's about 2.8%. I hope that that continues and that we see a decrease in some of these double-digit figures we were seeing for years and years, or a couple of years. Because I think it's important that most people understand, at least I hope they understand, that everybody on this council takes it very seriously how important the issues are to people in this community. That a lot of people in our town live on a fixed income, et cetera, et cetera. The last thing I'll say is 2 cents if I could on the revenue neutral rate, and how the words revenue neutral rate really kind of unintentionally do harm to a city like Tonganoxie. Tonganoxie is a growing community, right? We're over 6,000. I've seen some estimates of over 6,000 now. As that community grows, revenue neutral means if we're taking in 10 million, just to throw out a figure this year, and we have 7,000 living here next year, we still have to, if we wanted to live under revenue neutral, we'd have to collect 10 million next year to take care of 7,000 people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, where I'm from originally, out in West Kansas, their population is decreasing, so they can stay revenue neutral, and it would hurt their people because they got now 500 people paying for what 600 people had to pay for before. So the words revenue neutral, I think, are often misunderstood and in some ways misapplied on your statement. But that's all I really wanted to say. And I just echo Mr. Donnelly's comments that it's just very important that people understand that we care a lot about these decisions and spend a lot of time thinking about the impact that they'll have on everybody who lives here. And I think we've done a pretty good job of keeping a basically flat rate for this year. I think it'll meet the needs of the community, as well as give people at least a little bit of time to reacclimate to whatever their assessed valuations are on their property. And hopefully those stay relatively consistent in the years to come.
All right. Anything else from council? If not, I'll look for a motion.
I would make the motion. I believe it is 909-2401, resolution of the city of Tonganoxie, Kansas, levy a property tax rate exceeding the revenue neutral pursuant to KSA 79-2988. Do that, all right?
I'll second.
Jenny, are you still there with us? We need to do a roll call vote.
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you squeak something out? All right. All those in favor, Ms. Huntington, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Partridge?
Aye.
Ms. McCutcheon?
Yes.
Mr. Donnelly?
Yes.
Mr. Dale?
Yes.
And I can vote on this
Okay,
too,
Ms.
'cause-
Stevens?
Yes. As Mayor Pro Tem, I can still vote. All right, thank you. That has passed. And the next, adopting the 2025 proposed budget, that is also needed to be passed by a roll call vote. Do we want to have further discussion on this particular item, or are you all ready to make a motion?
I would just like to thank Dan and George and staff. I mean, you do better every year. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And there's so much information, and public out there, go pull this. It's online, and make sure it's online and they can see it.
Yeah.
you'll see more than any other city, I'm confident, or taxing
county.
entity in the county. You will see more information, more transparency than any place. And that's important to this council, that everybody knows what's going on, and that's an awesome document. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Any more discussion? If not, I would look for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the 2025 proposed budget as presented.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded that we approve the 2025 budget. If there's no further discussion, let's go ahead and take a roll call vote on that, if you don't mind, Ms. Huntington.
Yes. Mr. Partridge?
Aye.
Ms. McCutcheon?
yes,
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Donnelly?
Yes.
Mr. Dale?
Aye.
All right, that has also passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone, for your time on that. And with that, we'll move on to the city manager agenda. Do you have anything?
Sorry, I don't have anything listed on the agenda, but if you'll just give me 2 minutes. As I was watching the county meeting, the Board of County Commissioners, and talk about the budget, I'd just like to once more dispel what they say is happening at the Tonganoxie Business Park, and even on the project that they continue to say is 100% tax abatement and makes no impact to the community. So Hills is actually on the tax rolls through the county appraiser at a value of about $86 million, which translates to $21 million in assessed value added to the school district. So the school district has something called the capital mill outlay, which is about 7.5 mils in Tonganoxie, which means that this year Hills will pay $155,000 and some change to the school district just through that capital mill outlay that's protected. In addition, we negotiated a side agreement with Hills to pay something called a pilot, or payment in lieu of taxes, that's built upon a 12 mil value. So that a pilot payment is submitted every year just like a normal tax payment. So for this year, that's about an additional total of about $150,000 for the 10 years that Hills has as a tax abatement, which, by the way, in the state of Kansas, there's incentives that can go up to 25 years. So to get the largest capital investment in the history of Leavenworth County, yes, the city of Tonganoxie gave a 10-year 100% tax abatement. But I already mentioned the $155,000 at the school's capital mill outlay payment. The payments that the county will receive over the course of the 10 years of this pilot is just under $500,000. So I take great exception with our county commissioners continuing to lie to constituents to say there's no economic impact coming off of those projects. And I appreciate the couple of minutes to just get that on the record one more time as we adopted our budget tonight. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, it's extremely unprofessional and very disappointing. I agree. Let's see. City manager agenda, city attorney agenda. No items tonight. Mayor Pro Tem agenda. I was just going to say, coming up later in the month, we'll have Tonganoxie Days. That's a good collaboration between the Recreation Commission. They'll have fireworks the evening prior, and then there'll be a big festival downtown. City council agenda. Anyone else have anything to add or to say? For the mayor agenda, I spoke with the mayor, and he would like to appoint a person to the library board for one of the open city resident positions, and that person is Nicole Anderson, and they have applied for one of the two city resident open positions, and he would like me to appoint Nicole Anderson to the library board with your approval. And we don't need to do an official vote, just head nods around, and her application materials were in the packet for this week. Does that sound all right to everyone? Yes, all right. Congratulations to Nicole, and if you are also a city resident in Tonganoxie and are interested in getting involved with the library board, please do so.
Is that last opening for city residents only?
Yes. All right, I will turn to Jake Dale.
Well, I think it's the time of the meeting where I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All right. Hey, Jenny, thank you for hanging in there with us tonight. We appreciate it. Get better.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Poor thing. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
you.
Bye.
Bye.